That's how I'm interested in the future of change. Are we keeping up with the times, with the science of the times? What the sciences of psychology and sociology and economics are teaching us about human beings, what neuroscience is teaching us about human beings, but also how the world has changed. Look, 1993 is a long time ago. Cell phones were the size of, these things here. Like, who knew about remote work or Me Too or digital transformation or cloud computing or sustainability or all of these transformative forces on the workforce? Are we keeping up, those of us who help organizations change with that time? So I think not. And so that's my mission and my project is to help bring change management into the middle of I don't want to say the middle of this century, not quite in the middle yet, but anyway.
Welcome to the Inner Game of Change podcast, uncovering the layers of complexity of organizational change with the bright minds in the field. I am Ali Jama, and this is the Inner Game of Change podcast. Today I am thrilled to be joined by Paul Gibbons, a leading voice in the future of change management. In a previous episode, Paul and I chatted about the practice of change management in the 21st century. In this episode, we reference Paul's book, The Future of Change Management, where Paul explores the quiet revolution in how we understand transitions, blending behavioral science, mental health, generative AI, and neuroscience to offer more effective strategies for leading change. With up-to-date insights into HR, design thinking, and neurodiversity, Paul is reshaping the conversation around how businesses need to adapt in a rapidly evolving world. I am grateful to have Paul chatting with me today. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining me again in the Inner Game of Change podcast. I'm thrilled to have you back again and have a chat.
It's good to be here. And 25,000 downloads later, I know you said I was one of your first guys. And we never know how it's going to go, right? You never know if Inner Game of Change is going to explode and become popular, or nobody will listen to it except your mom.
Well, my principle was always the unknown can be far more exciting than the known. So I had a go exactly 2 years ago and sharing thoughts, and you were one of the first few that I reached out, and you kindly, with open arms, accepted my invitation. So I'm grateful for that, and you set me up in the right direction. Today, Paul, we are going to tackle some aspects of a new book, but before we start, it'll be great to introduce yourself to the audience who don't know you.
Well, hello, audience that don't know me. I'm the author. I think I've written 7 books now. I wrote my first book when I was 53. So I was a terrible writer. So those of you who think, when I joined a company called PricewaterhouseCoopers in the 1990s, they had a remedial writing course for consultants. I took it twice because I failed it the first time. That's how bad I was. But there are people today who would say that I'm a very talented and good writer. So there you go. I'm not a natural, but I've written 7 books on change, mostly in change, leadership, that sort of area. And it's nice to talk about change because everyone wants to talk about today is AI. I'm giving a talk on AI this weekend to 1,000 people in Las Vegas. So anyway, nice to talk about change for change.
We will tackle AI at some stage during this podcast. It will be a miss if we don't talk about it. It is a hot topic and a relevant topic that is actually circling around in the business of change. Your new book, what motivated you to write about the new book? 2 years ago, you were pretty much writing about the impact of change, the organizational change, change myths as well, was one of your books, I think. And now I think you're focusing on the future of change.
Yeah, I am focusing on the future of change, but I think I became interested in the future of change when I went to write my first book, The Science of Organizational Change, in good golly, it's a long time ago. 2013, I started the book, and I was reading at the same time the book by a guy who's sadly just passed called Daniel Kahneman.
Yeah.
I was reading Thinking Fast and Slow. And I was also reading other books on behavioral science. And I was ignorant about behavioral science. Even though I have a master's in psychology, I didn't know anything about this thing called behavioral science. It's a relatively new area. And I was thinking to myself as I was writing this book on change management, it's like nobody in change management is talking about behavioral science. And behavioral science seems to be the most reliable way of changing human behavior. It includes stuff like influencing, training and development. It includes insights from neuroscience and sociology and psychology and economics and all those other disciplines. It's an umbrella discipline. But it seems to me that among the tools of behavioral science, there's some of the best we have to change behaviors. And so that's how I became interested in the future of change management, because a lot of the stuff that I was introduced to in the 1990s, I still see it around today. I still see it on LinkedIn. People post it as if it's a new kind of insight, this is exciting and new. And I said, well, actually, it's from 1973 or earlier. So anyway, so that's why I'm interested in it. Is, are we keeping up with the time? Are our ideas about how to change organizations keeping up with how different things are? Look, it's not 1993. I think John Kotter wrote his seminal book on change. It's around the early 90s. I remember, it might be 1989, might be 1992. And it was great at the time. He and Darrell Connor, and I think there's this guy called Jeff Hyatt also, who wrote really some of the first books that were attempting to assemble change management into a body of knowledge that people could use, and a series of tools that people could use. And they did a great job at the time, but has it kept up? And that's the question we have to ask ourselves. So that's how I'm interested in the future of change. Are we keeping up with the times, with the science of the times? What the sciences of psychology and sociology and economics are teaching us about human beings? What neuroscience is teaching us about human beings, but also how the world has changed. Look, 1993 is a long time ago. Cell phones were the size of, these things here. Like, who knew about remote work or Me Too or digital transformation or cloud computing or sustainability or all of these transformative forces on the workforce? Are we keeping up, those of us who help organizations change with that time? So I think not. And so that's my mission and my project is to help bring change management into the middle of I don't want to say the middle of this century, not quite in the middle yet, but anyway, into this century. It
takes a kind of audacity for you to try to forecast what the future of change is.
Yeah, it's I advance these ideas as possibilities.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Not like I wish that I were the change, prophet, the Pope of change, infallible. But unfortunately, I'm not blessed with that. But some ideas I think are missing. So, for example, okay, let's take one example from the book, Chapter 2. This is the new book, came out yesterday. Future of Change Management. Chapter 2, Mental Health and Change.
Yeah.
If you look at any book that's been written on change, I would defy you to find a chapter on mental health and change. Maybe there might be one. You got to remember there are thousands and 5,000 books on change out there. So, but I would suspect you wouldn't see it. But we know, if I ask people, does change affect people's mental health? And they would say, yeah, it kind of does. Sometimes, if it's badly managed, it can really affect people badly. And most people in organizations will remember from their history, like some time when a change was poorly managed and people got, ill. And I just came from IBM, where there was a change that was happening there. And there were many people who were willing to talk to me about the mental health struggles that were happening as a result of a change that was going through. So we know it's important, but yet nobody's written about it. And how should you, Ali, as someone who works with organizations on change, how can you be aware of the effect of change on mental health? What are the tools you could use? What is mental health at work? And there are ethical questions like, do organizations have a responsibility towards people who work there for their mental health. Because in my day, when I started working, a long time ago now, right? Previous century, 1980, when I started working, your mental health was your own business.
Yes.
Like if I may be vulgar, organizations didn't give a shit. You suited up and you showed up. And if you couldn't suit up and show up because you were impaired mental health wise, that was bad luck. Too bad, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Find something else. I hope you do well, but can't have you around here. And so the world has changed. Again, are we keeping up in change? Maybe not. That's a chapter in the book, which I think was waiting to be written. I wrote it with a really great guy from Google called Newton Cheng, who's an activist and an advocate for mental health. He's kind of a head of mental health at Google. Not really. He's head of wellness at Google, director of wellness and performance at Google. So I wrote it with him. It's really good. Anyway, that's enough for me. What do you think of that as an idea, buddy?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of discussion around psychological safety. And let me just go back to that point when in the old days and I am probably as not far behind you, Paul, in age, I was told
you're pretty far behind me.
I was told to leave. I think my first job was in 1992, and I was told to leave myself at home. When I come to work, I put on another persona. And I really believed in that. And then I was promoting that as a leader for the next 10 years, because I thought work is a very unemotional stuff. Come do the job and get out. And then later, obviously, with time and experience, I started to learn something different, that we are inseparable. In fact, I got to the stage that authenticity is when you don't try to be somebody that you're not outside work. And so that's why we believe certain people when they speak to us. We believe them because we don't see a discrepancy between what they say and what they project in there. So that's one. So but when you talk about the workplace, the way I see it is that mental health, mismanaging change can severely, and I've seen it in all my projects, can severely impact.
So is everybody, right? Everybody's seen it. But we don't talk about it.
We don't talk about it. And this is the level of heightened, because every change comes with a level of heightened threat. And how we manage it, we minimize that threat. But if you leave it heightened, immediately will impact people, ways of thinking, mentality, engagement. Will actually be impacted directly. So I completely subscribe to that. Unfortunately, many organizations do not equip their leaders to deal with those situations. And the other observation that I've had over the years is that we in the business of change also would have a responsibility on how that change is being managed and how our clients actually need to be advised on the impacts of change, not only on the processes and the systems, but as you mentioned, on the human side as well.
Sure.
I want to ask you.
Go
ahead, Paul.
I don't want leaders to think this is the only chapter in the book. Is one of 10 chapters.
I will cover. I promise you, I'll cover quite a few things. So I'm really excited about the.
But there's an important point you raise is that the role of a leader, because leaders are under pressure themselves, right? They're human beings. They're not trained as counselors, therapists, or anything like that. They have varying levels of emotional intelligence, some none, some substantial. Right. So the leader's job, if we say that this is now part of something they need to be aware of, we need to equip them to be able to do it. And even as someone who's aware myself, I remember I was working on a project just recently and the time pressures were enormous and I was under enormous pressure and I was working with someone and I kept applying that pressure to them. It's like, look, we have a deadline here and when can you do this by? And, I was being, I wasn't being a bully about it, but I was like, can we finish this by Tuesday? And they kept putting it off and missing deadlines and everything like that. And a compassionate leader would say, okay, something's not right over there.
Yes.
So a not compassionate leader would say, what the heck is going on? Why are you letting me down? Why are you letting the project down? A compassionate leader would say, how are you doing? Like, no, not really, how are you doing? Not, don't take fine for an answer. Like, how are you really doing? And if I'd asked that question, if I'd stopped, and I eventually did, but if I didn't do it quickly enough, in my view, how are you really doing? Because we're not making the kind of progress that I think we're committed to making here. I think, are you under some stress, or are you under some pressure, or what's going on with you? And it turns out that they were suffering, and they had to take a 6-week break from the project, which was fine with me. But I think the compassionate leader, all leaders are under pressure to deliver results, right?
Yes.
And they need to be able to, and we praise people for going the extra mile, for leaning in, whatever the expression is, for taking one for the team. We have these expressions at work, and they're thought to be good things. But when we have to ask ourselves, when is the extra mile 1 mile too many? Is a question. Like, when are we asking that? And we're not conscious and aware enough of balancing the wellness and the well-being of our workforce with the pressures that we feel to perform and deliver. I don't say that it's easy, so it's easy to be glib about that, but it's something I think we need to get better at doing.
Certainly not easy. And when a leader will ask me a question around how I'm feeling rather than where we are with the project, Paul,
yes, right.
that changes the conversation. And it changes also the discussion. It changes how I feel about it. And also it changes the level of openness from the employee around. Sometimes we try to cover up quite a few gaps in our project, but when we talk about ourselves and we have that level of trust with the leader, that they're curious and interested in me as a human, then the conversation will be completely different. I want to ask you a question. There's a chapter in your book around minds, and then there's a statement that says brains in constant change. Do you want to go deeper into that, Paul?
Well, I got Hilary Scarlett, who wrote a book called Neuroscience for Organizational Change, which for my money is the best book on neuroscience and organizational change. She did a magnificent job. And I got her to write the chapter. And if you haven't had her on the podcast, she's someone you might want to consider getting on the podcast. She's a terrific scholar, but she's mostly a practitioner. She's a practitioner.
I did have her as my guest. Yes.
Did you?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So she wrote the chapter. And the big question that she asks is, our brains. So there's an idea introduced by David Rock and a neuroscientist called brains hate change. I think is rubbish, right? I mean, brains don't hate every change. They hate some change. They hate change that's forced upon them often. But it's a more interesting question is, what kind of change do brains hate rather than brains hate all change? And I think when you start to make blanket statements like they did, it was very sensationalist, and it was in Strategy and Business Magazine, and brains hate change, and probably appeared in the popular press as, if your organization's going for change, your brain hates it. It's rubbish. And she doesn't make that mistake. So it's a really great chapter, I think, an introduction to the idea of neuroscience and organizational change. There's another chapter in that section of the book on neurodiversity, which I won't say too much about it, but basically we cleave the world into normal and not normal. We cleave human beings into abnormal and normal. And people, the label we use today sometimes is neurodiverse for people who have Asperger's and ADHD and they're on the spectrum or whatever. And basically they're discarded. They're often discarded. They're discarded by society and they're discarded by businesses. And companies like IBM are beginning to take neurodiversity seriously. Is, how do we hire these people? How do we accommodate in our business culture people who are, a little bit different? And I think it has the potential to be of tremendous benefit to society and to the companies, because they can broaden their search for talent to people who don't quite fit the normal quote unquote mode. So I think that chapter is really exciting for me. I don't know what you think about it, but it's another thing at the frontier of change is, how do we think about neurodiversity? Yeah, all kinds of diversity, but not just.
Talk to me about how the workplace and employees and people in the workplace, our expectations changing from what we expect from the organization, or has it always been this way and now we understand it at a deeper level?
Oh, I wouldn't say that the change is going to be instantaneous. This is the sort of thing that will take decades to change. Yeah. I mean, ADHD is only now really beginning to be understood as a thing. ADHD wasn't a thing when I was a kid. You were just a bad kid.
I'm still a bad kid, Paul.
Yeah, you're a bad kid. I was labeled.
Yes.
A bad kid. Yeah. Because she's a kid. And today that thankfully wouldn't happen. I have a child who, one of my sons has it, and he was treated with great compassion. They gave him support. They didn't tolerate it, but they gave him behavioral support to help him learn and keep up with his peers. And, inshallah, he's done very, very, very well out of the love and support of his school. So anyway, it's an interesting thing. And I think, we don't want to discard that part of humanity who thinks a little bit differently about the world. It's a great thing for business, a great thing for organizations. And we as change practitioners, also need to think about diversity in broad ways, not just racial and ethnic diversity, but also diverse psychological diversity, if you want. So anyway, that's my hope for that chapter, is that we have more compassionate and welcoming and belonging type workplaces for people who in earlier times would have been thought of as just strange.
Belonging is an interesting word.
Isn't it? Yeah.
And it's a very deep word, and it actually can help creating a culture that you aspire to create. In one of your chapters, you talk about culture change beyond shared values. Do you want to double click on that, Paul?
Sure. So there are 4 chapters on what could be called behavioral science, 3 that are kind of almost sort of theoretically, and one that's a series of tools. I'll talk about the tools chapter first, just very quickly. People often study behavioral science. They'll learn it from someone like me, who's been trying to introduce behavioral science into the change world for 10 years. And they'll go, okay, this is really interesting. And it clearly produces results in medicine and in public health and in public policy implementation. And it's obviously empirically based. There's a lot of evidence about how you can change behaviors better. But as a change person, as a change management person who's got a job to do inside a business, what are the tools I can use? What can I do tomorrow? I understand that the theory says that I should be doing these things, but what are the tools? So we have a chapter on the tools. And also a guy who's from Australia. Well, he's not from Australia, but he lives in Perth. James Healy wrote a chapter on shared values. And a typical approach to changing culture in organizations is to ask people a bunch of questions about their values. Ask the organizational questionnaires. They tell you what they think their values are. And then you have senior leadership who say, these are what the values should be: integrity, respect, customer service, whatever they might be. And the approach to changing values is to try and close that gap between the values that people say exist in the organization and the values that say senior leaders the organization should have: integrity, excellence, customer service, respect, whatever they are, right? Yeah. They're almost always the same thing. It's the same words. The question is, does that work, right? Here's the question, right? We ask as change people is, does it work to talk about values for senior leaders to have a series of 4 or 6 or 3 or 10 values that are important to the organization, and then strive to have the workplace adopt them? And the answer is, doesn't work. And that's the short answer to a thing on which there's been a ton of research. My own approach, and the approach favored by James Healy from Deloitte in Perth, is to focus on behaviors. When you're trying to change culture, is think about how we're behaving to one another. So if you want a culture, for example, where, let's say, respect and inclusion are part of what's important to your culture, if I may be vulgar again, I don't give a shit that you think respect and inclusion are good ideas. I want to see your behavior be respectful and inclusive. And too many organizations say, oh, we're all in favor of diversity and inclusion and respect and belonging and everything like that. You don't see that in behaviors. And that's what happens when you talk incessantly about values and not about cultural behaviors. So that chapter begins to address some of what's a gap in the way that we think about culture, is we don't think enough about behaviors. Because as there's a saying we have in psychology, behaviors never lie.
Behaviors never lie, yes.
They don't lie, right? Yeah. If someone's doing something, you can infer that they believe something. That's their belief, right? But if someone says they believe something, we have politicians who say honesty is their principal value. They're not very honest. We say that integrity is very important when they don't live with much integrity. And we have politicians who say respect is very important to them, but they don't live very respectful lives.
So, Paul, how do you think behaviors are shaped and formed in an organization?
It's a complex story. So I know I'm talking to another professional, and a lot of your audience will be professionals. So if you ask a psychology student, list 50 things that drive human behavior, they could probably do it. There's a whole family of things called incentives. There's a whole family of things which are cultural, social, behavioral norms, for example. There are a whole lot of psychological factors. There are beliefs. There are values. There are a set of beliefs around self-efficacy. Can I do something?
Yes.
Is important before people. So anyway, you should be able to list 50 factors. Now, do we take sufficient account of that complexity when we try and change behaviors in organizations? So there's a list. It's in the new book, Future of Change Management, of 93 behavioral change techniques that was developed by a researcher in London called Susan Mishi. And there are 93 of them. So you're a change guy, and your client says, how are we going to change behavior? You bring them this list of 93 things, you'll probably get thrown out of the office, right?
Yes.
It's too complex to be used on a daily basis. So we need a tool for reducing those to the most probable ones that will change behaviors. And that's why there's a chapter on how you might do that, on how you get that 93 down to a subset. So there's some mistake that someone makes is they try and reduce it to something like ADKAR, which is simple to the point of simplistic. I think it's actually dangerous to use it because you start with a list of 5, which isn't super accurate, right? And you work from there. I think it's better to start with a bigger list and pare it down. If the risk of starting with 5 is ADKAR, for example, you talked about psychological safety. Where's psychological safety in there? I don't see it. Where's the effect of the environment on behavior? I don't see it. Where's the effect of social norms on behavior? I don't see it. And the risk is when you use a simplistic framework like ADKAR, you make a big mistake because, God forbid it, that the thing that's going to make the biggest difference is psychological safety. It's not in the framework that you've decided to use to change behavior. So that's the problem, is that you have this tug of war between oversimplification and overcomplicated. Einstein once said things should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. Anyway, I hope that's a good answer for you.
Yes, absolutely. And then the way I see it is that, applying frameworks like ADKAR, you're going to have to go way deeper than the service level. But I completely understand. I think it's our job as a minimum to really understand that deeper level and that sweet spot that you talked about, that we can communicate the impacts of change in a simple way that our clients can actually understand. But there's something in my mind that when I read that particular piece in the chapter, there's something called unwritten rules in a culture and behaviors.
Yeah.
Where do you think these come from? Because they are not part of the values, and then they sort of organically happen.
The world is full of unwritten rules. I mean, no one ever wrote down that it's okay to be 5 minutes late for a meeting if that happens to be a culture. in other, but generally speaking, this thing. But if you are 25 minutes late for a meeting in France, 20 minutes late, that's considered to be fine. These are the unwritten rules of culture. So, for example, in some Asian cultures, challenging your boss is a bad thing. Like, it's just seen as impolite. In fact, even giving someone direct feedback in some Asian cultures can be seen as being rude. What we consider to be quote unquote good feedback in the West is sometimes seen as rude and barbaric in the East. So these are the sort of examples of unwritten rules of the game. And unwritten rules is not a bad way to describe culture. It's these tacit expectations. Back when I started as a consultant, it suspected if your work wasn't done by 5 o'clock, you would work until it was done. Mm-hmm. If that was midnight or 2 or 3 in the morning, and people may sound like, oh, you're exaggerating, Paul. I stayed in the office in London until 3 in the morning, not every week, but also definitely more than once. That's an unwritten rule of the game. No one wrote down you will stay till 3 a.m. But that was an unwritten expectation of the job. So these things are all over the workplace, and it takes courage to articulate them and challenge them. That's my take on the unwritten rules, if you will.
I did join an organization that actually had that as part of their values, the unwritten rules, believe it or not. And
really?
Yes.
Yeah.
But there was when people hear about it now, they think this was really bad. But at the time, I'm talking about 2015, 2016, and a big organization. But at the time, the executive team were right to say, I don't need to put a rule for you to be an honest person.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't want to have to articulate everything. No, I don't want to have a rule that my children say please and thank you. Yeah,
that's what they were meaning by that. But I think after a number of years, there was a change in leadership, and then they discovered that the unwritten rules have sort of mushroomed to other unwritten rules.
Sure.
And so they needed to sort of discard that and actually be overt about the values they want to drive in there. So sometimes, unwritten rules like respect, I really don't need to put that as a rule. I mean, isn't that a common sense? But sometimes, I find it still surprising that some organizations put that as part of their values.
Well, we need to discuss, of course, what respect looks like. It means different things to different people.
Sure.
And so I don't think it's a worthless conversation. In fact, I think it's very worthwhile if you're going to talk about abstract things like integrity and respect. Talk, well, what does integrity mean?
Yes.
What does authenticity mean? What does respect mean? Like, what does it mean behaviorally? Because that's what we really care about. Right? We really care about the behaviors. That's how you know someone is being respectful, is because they behave respectfully. The behavior doesn't lie, right? Someone can say respect is important to them, but they may behave otherwise. I'm interested in how they behave. So that's my behavioral scientist's soapbox, if you will.
You talked about the design thinking, and then you talked about uses and abuses of design thinking. Can you go deeper into that?
Yeah, I wrote this chapter with a guy who's the global head of change at Deloitte, and he's about like 1,000 change consultants working for him, maybe 2,000. And I wrote it with him. And there was an idea at the time when we wrote it, was that design thinking would replace change management. So things like we've done this, we've used kind of this design thinking workshop. Say it was a 5-day design thinking workshop, or say it was a 3-month design thinking product. We've done the change management. And well, the question is, okay, have you? And IBM makes a big deal of their thing called an IBM Garage, which is effectively their design thinking workshop. That is a separate part of the organization from the people who consider themselves to be organizational change experts. And so there can be a tug of war between them. So anyway, what's the relationship of design thinking and organizational change? And in very brief, the first step in design thinking is often empathy, is really understanding in a deep way the experience of the people that you wish to influence. That, in a way, some design thinking has empathy built into it, which in the way that not all change models do. Not all change models don't have that word. Like if you look at John Cotter's 8 Steps, doesn't have empathy in it.
Yeah.
If you look at ADKAR, it doesn't have empathy in it. If you look at many of these change works. So design thinking has got some good change management stuff baked in. It's also got creativity baked in.
Yes.
If you look at change models, John Cotter's 8 Steps, other, formulaic change models, do they have creativity baked in? No, they don't. So some creativity kind of leaks into the process, but design thinking is very good. It's brought in these two things into the design process. So it's good, empathy and creativity. Okay, so that's the kind of quote unquote uses of design thinking. The other half of the chapter, of course, is uses and abuses of design thinking. You'd be making a very big mistake if you run a design thinking workshop and think that you've done all the change management that you need to do. because you don't want to be the first to design. You want to be the first to scale. Design thinking produces prototypes, very excellent at prototyping and rapid iteration. But you need to be able to scale it. You need to be able to engage the whole organization. You need to be able to work with the politics and the stakeholders and the conflict and the acceptance and the influencing and all that kind of good change management stuff. So I say that change management and design thinking work really well in harmony. And I think design thinking brings something to organizational change that are missing: this explicit focus on empathy and an explicit focus on creativity. So I like it. And so that's the uses and abuses of design thinking chapter in the book, is how do you get design thinking and change management to work in harmony to produce the results you want to produce? What do you think of that?
I love that. I love that. I love that.
Like that?
And
you like that one?
Unfortunately, a lot of projects, they do not bake in how the design of the product or the change will impact the emotions and the sentiments of the people. So I love that, and I think that will be a really worthwhile chapter for my audience to read.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. I mean, the good thing about this book, The Future of Change Management, that we're talking about, is all these chapters can be read kind of individually. They kind of stand alone. I mean, they work together in a way. But if you're interested in design thinking and organizational change, maybe just that chapter will be interesting to you. Or interested in mental health and organizational change, maybe that will be interesting to you. So that's what we've done, is we've created a menu, I think, that people can choose from. Before
we go into the hype of AI and ChatGPT, I want to ask you a question. And it's a phrase that I would steal from you and then start using. You did put something around, we're in the business of people analytics.
Oh, yes. Well, I'm referring to my experience lately in the corporate world, is that, human resources, we're very good at people analytics these days. Big companies have masses and masses of data on their employees, on their employee behavior. I mean, arguably too much, right? But they can track. There was something that was invented called a mouse jiggler. Some companies track your activities at your keyboard. Yes. How much you're clicking and what you're clicking on. If you're clicking on TikTok, they'll know it. And so there's a thing called a mouse jiggler, which will move your mouse around on the Salesforce screen or whatever screen you should be working on while you take a break. So they're collecting too much data. And so anyway, we have a lot of data, and it's often very useful, whether it be sentiment analysis or thoughts and feelings or behaviors, whatever it is. But does people analytics inform the way that change management people work? Because frequently it's in a different part of the organization. So I know we were doing some big changes at IBM, and IBM is very good at people analytics. It sells people analytics solutions to their clients. So we had robust people analytics inside IBM. But the change practice can be working on something entirely different, and they don't talk to each other enough. So the question is, for your readers, for your listeners, is how can people analytics support change management by a deeper understanding, a deeper data-driven understanding of what's going on in the organization? So that's what that chapter is about. And yes, there is a chapter on ChatGPT. All right, of course. Yawn.
Let's get into that. And
I got to confess something to you, though. I got to confess something. I'm being asked to give keynote speeches on. I'm getting one in Las Vegas this weekend with 1,000 people, and on generative artificial intelligence. And I've been doing a lot of research for it. Like, I've spent the last month researching it and trying to use it more and more and more in my life. I will tell you something: the more I use it and the more I study it, the more amazed I am. And that's not always the case.
I am in this camp. I've been lucky to be involved in formulating an AI strategy for a client. That was August last year, and I'm still working on it. And I got deeper into the rabbit hole, and I thought at the time when the internet came, I ignored it in my lifetime, and I thought, that's not going to impact me. And lo and behold, internet consumed our lives. And so this new wave of AI, I thought, a man in my 50s, I thought I missed it all. I am not missing this wave. Like you, the more I'm using it. So 5 years ago, I really wanted to hire somebody to do the stuff that I don't need to do, that I'd like somebody else to do for me. And so I can service more clients and I can focus on insight rather than the doing of the stuff. AI is doing that for me now. It's giving me that capacity.
Isn't it great?
It's great. So the question is, and I attended an AI summit in Sydney in Australia for higher education, 3 days, and I was amazed at what universities are actually doing as well.
Me too.
The question is, so here's my thinking the other day, and please critique my thinking around AI and generative AI in particular. I am thinking that Gen AI will not take over a change manager's job, but a change manager with an AI capability will take over another change manager's job.
Yeah, that's one of my quotes, isn't it? Your job won't be taken over by an AI, but it will be taken by somebody who knows how to use AI in their work.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. Well, so we're on the same camp.
That's a Paul Gibbons quote. But So absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. You know, if you're not AI literate in 5 years, you're screwed. I don't care what your job is. I don't care what your function is. I don't care what your role is. And if you're not able to use the power tools of AI in your work, you're going to be screwed. Yeah. You're going to be a dinosaur. And it's just like, from my point of view, is we had to give the partners at PricewaterhouseCoopers like special deep immersion training, because these partners were the 40 and 50 and 60-year-olds. They're very set in their ways. Just think on email came along and they're like, oh, I'm not doing that. I'm going to, use pen and paper. I don't want that. Yeah. We had to, behavioral change was like, these old guys didn't want to do it. And so we had to really work hard to get the partners at the firm to start to use email in their communications. And, that was when email was thought of as a good thing, 1994, way back when. But it's going to be the same way now. You're going to be a dinosaur if you don't know how to use these things. And the use cases in science are off the charts. What AI is doing in medicine is off the charts. I'll give you one example.
And agriculture. I've been reading about this.
And everywhere, and geoscience and climate change and physics and chemistry and informatics and cosmology and quantum physics and fusion research, and the list goes on and on and on and on. I spent like a month looking at the use cases in science, and my jaw drops. But I mean, just one. Breast cancer is often detected by mammograms, right? X-rays or fMRI, right? And the specialist radiologist will look at it and say, okay, there's a glitch on the thing. We need to investigate that. Maybe we'll do a biopsy to see if that's cancer or not. You use AI can see things we can't see. It's not just like the naked eye can't perceive it, but it's like there are patterns there that the human eye just isn't equipped to detect. AI can see those. And they're doing AI now using AI in a predictive way. For breast examinations to examine patterns in the mammogram that will tell you why you might get breast cancer in 3 or 5 years. We're able to predict it. In organizations, to bring it maybe back to a business example, we can use predictive analytics, predictive AI to decide who's might be at risk of leaving the firm. There'll be certain behavior. If someone's thinking of leaving, they'll start to do certain things, behave in a certain way. And we can use that data to begin to predict the way that people might behave. And we can pay attention to that. We can do it. So there's all sorts of ways in which AI will see aspects of the world that we now can't see. Patterns in the data, material science, understanding at a subatomic level why a certain material will be more supple or more flexible or more hard or more rigid or more porous or more thing. And all of that's just understanding the chemistry at a level that the human brain couldn't begin to understand. So the use cases are just crazy. particularly you'll be seeing them in medicine very soon. And I think it's incumbent upon, the younger listeners here and the older listeners to really get on the train. I mean, my kids are using it all the time, right? They're in college and high school, right? They're all over it. And by the time they're in the workforce, they'll be experts at using artificial intelligence in their lives. And if you're somebody who's not, that's bad luck, I'm afraid. So anyway, I've done a lot of research recently, and I'm just completely wowed.
I love that. And I am in the same camp. I'm actually working on 39 use cases for a couple of universities now. And the work that's going to come out of it is quite amazing. So I consider myself as the luckiest person in the business of change to be in the middle of this.
You're crazy lucky to get that job.
And working closely with the executive team in my capacity as a change and an engagement lead, influencing a strategy, and also working closely with Microsoft for their co-pilot, and I'm in the middle of their learnings as they actually start.
That's incredible. And that's going to be so amazing for your career for the next 10 years. The fact that you've actually held an organization's hand as they're going through the first steps in their AI journey, having to formulate strategy and deliver strategy, to implement strategy and all that kind of stuff. Wow.
Big responsibility,
incredible
Paul.
Experience.
Big responsibility. But I'm grateful, and I've got the support from the executive team, but you're going to have to deliver at the end of the day. I am thoroughly enjoying this conversation, Paul. As usual, time flies when I talk to you. And
that's what we do.
What is the final words for you for the change community when it comes to change? That is a question that I usually ask my guests in the podcast.
Don't settle for what you've been using for the last 20 or 30 years. Think about for yourself what tools you want to bring into your change game. Think about for yourself what you want the future of change management to be. Join us, the people around the world that are having conversations about the future of change management. Don't sit there and wait for us to, I'm not the Pope, think for yourself, read the book. You don't have to love it, but think for yourself is like, how do you want to grow yourself and grow your practice over the next 5 or 10 years? Because I know one thing for sure, if you're doing in 10 years the same thing as you'd be doing today in change, it's not going to go well for you, because there are people out there like my friend at IBM and like you who are beginning to use, for example, AI in their work. And if you're not, I'm afraid you're going to be, kind of a dinosaur like those partners at PricewaterhouseCoopers that didn't want to use email back in the 1990s. It's like, you got to get on the bus, buddy. So anyway, that's what I think. Future of Change Management. It came out 2 days ago, so I'm super excited about it. I hope your readers enjoy it. I hope you enjoy it, Ali, when you get done reading it. I know you've dived into various bits and pieces.
Yes.
And if I can be of service to your listeners or anything like that, they can call me at paulgibbons.net.
Fantastic. We're going to put all your information in the podcast. Paul, you referenced and talked about Hillary Scarlett. I did have her in November 23rd, and she was on episode number 37 in my podcast. So thank you for reminding me about Hillary. Great book.
Oh, she's magnificent.
Great speaker.
If I can connect you with any of the other authors from this book, so I'm only the editor. I mean, I did write some of it, but if you want a connection to any of the other authors on neurodiversity and mental health, on Gen AI or any of those folks, then you just let me know.
I trust your choice, and I'm happy to oblige. So always welcome, Paul. I hope to get you back, and then we'll talk probably deeper into the world of AI and how we use those tools, Paul. But until then, stay well and stay safe.
Yeah, stay well. Peace. Take it easy.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you found this episode valuable, remember to subscribe to stay updated on upcoming episodes. Your support is truly appreciated. And by sharing this podcast with your colleagues, friends, and fellow change practitioners, you can help me reach even more individuals and professionals who can benefit from these discussions. Remember, and in my opinion, change is an enduring force, and you will only have a measure of certainty and control when you embrace it. Until next time, Thank you for being part of the Inner Game of Change community. I am Ali Jama, and this is the Inner Game of Change podcast.
That was very enjoyable, my friend. What did you think?
I feel like I've connected again with a friend, so I really appreciate the experience. Really great.
Well, we only live 10,000 kilometers apart. We should meet for coffee.
We should.